This is the Tame Aperture podcast.
Open the pod bay doors, Cal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Welcome to the Tame Aperture podcast, where we talk all things movies from first-time directors, indie, art house, and much, much more. Go check us out at tameaperture.com for previous episodes and to make suggestions on future episodes. Today on the podcast, we talk The Killing of a Sacred Deer from Yargos Lanthimos. Stephen, a charismatic surgeon, is forced to make an unthinkable sacrifice after his life starts to fall apart when the behavior of a teenage boy he has taken under his wing turns sinister. The film stars Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman and Barry Keoghan. It was also written by Yargos and is the follow-up film to his 2015 movie The Lobster, also starring Colin Farrell. I'm Gabe Vienendahl, filmmaker, film instructor, and movie enthusiast, and I'm joined tonight by none other than the co-host, my main man, Alan Martindale, veteran podcaster and editor. Alan, how you doing tonight in this COVID world?
I'm doing good, man. I didn't know anything about this movie, and then when I saw it was released by A24, I was on board immediately. I haven't seen all the films they've released, but everything I've seen, I love. I absolutely love. So I was stoked from the beginning as soon as I saw it. So I'm good, man. I'm really excited to talk about this. I am dying to get your thoughts on what the hell is happening in this movie.
Yeah, it's funny because I thought the same thing. This was a movie where I was just sitting one night and you're kind of flipping through the streaming services, and I'm on Netflix, right? And I just see Colin Farrell, and I like Colin Farrell. I immediately I remember vaguely hearing something about this movie, but I had never seen it. But I like Colin Farrell, so I was like, let's give it a shot. So I turned it on, and ironically enough, I agree with you. Like, I felt the same way. As soon as I saw A24 had a hand in it, I thought, okay, most of their stuff's pretty spot on. Most of their stuff's pretty good. So I think we're in for something. And then it starts, and about 10, 15 minutes in, I'm thinking to myself, what is going on? I'm constantly asking myself questions about this kid and why he has such a relationship with this doctor, and it's perplexing. I was confused. Yeah. So I'm also excited to talk about it. I thought it was an interesting selection. I think it's a good one to get into, but I had a lot of confusion almost all the way through the entirety of the film, and I'm constantly sitting there trying to figure out in my head what we're dealing with. And for me, and I hadn't read anything about it, I hadn't seen any trailers, I just went straight into the viewing. And so immediately I got a little bit of Kubrick. I got a little bit of Kubrick in primarily in how he's utilizing the music and the tonality of the music, as it's that creepy, eerie, ambient kind of, ethereal kind of music sounds. And so I kind of got that, and also just the confusion of not quite sure what's going on. And so the psychology of it started making me ask myself questions. And I started to try to break it down and figure out what was going on. And so the setup to this, we'll jump into it, is basically you have a surgeon, basically a heart surgeon, a cardiovascular surgeon, who has a family. He has a young boy and a daughter, and a wife played by Nicole Kidman. And it seems like they're doing quite well for themselves, and he's quite successful as this surgeon. And then there's these random periodic meetings at the beginning with this young man named Martin. And he's a boy of like 15, 16 years old. And they just start randomly meeting. Also, the dialogue and the conversations between them were they were interesting. Like, right. The way that they spoke to each other, you knew that they had some kind of history, but you weren't sure what it was.
Well, at first, I was convinced that this kid was like his lover. I was convinced like it was his secret, torrid affair that he was having. and it was super, super on the DL. And I agree, the dialogue is strange because it was almost felt like a little bit of Guy Ritchie, maybe a little bit of Tarantino, but delivered in just deadpan, no emotion whatsoever.
Yeah.
The whole movie actually felt like almost like a B movie. Like you see some of these, like in The Room, some of the line deliveries really felt like it was just delivered just horribly, but you could tell it was intentional. I don't know what he was doing. I don't know what he was thinking, trying to direct them that way. And even Colin Farrell, this is how good of an actor he is. I always love seeing Colin Farrell. Anytime I see those eyebrows, I'm a happy man because I know it's going to be, even if the movie sucks, he's going to be good in it. And I thought this movie was great, but even with the dead, monotone, boring acting, he still put on a hell of a performance. I don't know how he did it. I was actually thinking about that. I was trying to think how he did that and why I enjoyed this movie, especially in the first act, because nothing really happens in the first act. It's really kind of slow, and normally I'd be checking my watch, but I was intrigued the whole time. I couldn't take my eyes off it.
You're just kind of, yeah, because
What's
I just
that?
kept asking myself the question, like, what are we doing? And I
Right.
think sometimes there's those films where that first act is like you said, it's boring and you're kind of checking your watch. There's not a lot of action going, and in this film there's not either, but for some reason there's an intrigue, and maybe that's the performance of Farrell as he kind of helps guide it through. But it's the constant question of like, where is this going? Where, and he's built somehow, and I'm trying to pinpoint how he does it, but somehow he builds a constant curiosity throughout.
Right.
Like
Right.
what's the relationship between this kid and this surgeon, and then how does his family play into it? Now those things are revealed later on, and we kind of get an idea, but that, like you said, that first act, I'm sitting there wondering constantly what's going on. I also I thought that Barry Keoghan, this kid that plays the young man that Colin Farrell has you think he has a relationship with in a sexual way. I thought the
Right.
same thing. The undertone to me when they start talking to each other in the beginning of the film is that Colin Farrell is stepping out on his wife. He's having an affair with this young boy. And that, you're right, for me, that was also planted in my mind. And I think he's doing that intentionally as a misdirection because it's not really what's happening.
Right.
But initially you're thinking that, so maybe some of those questions are posed. But this Barry Keoghan, what I was getting at is his performance too is so curious. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. It sparks a lot of curiosity, a lot of he very awkward and very strange, but intriguing to watch. Like,
For
can
sure.
still hold the camera and still hold the scene. And when you're going up against, you're battling in a scene against an actor like Colin Farrell, that could be hard to do. But I think this kid does a good job comparatively, throwing blows with him essentially in scenes, and you're just, the curiosity is there. So
Definitely. And it's a little interesting to talk about the acting in this because it's not really, you don't look at it and say in a traditional way, that's great acting. Like, it just doesn't, the way it's directed is so deadpan, but still,
this is not,
you're watching a very good performance.
Absolutely. This is not Marlon Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire.
Right, exactly.
Now, that's how I'm going to clear the table. Don't you ever talk that way to me. Pig, Polak, disgusting, vulgar, greasy. Those kind of words have been on your tongue, and your sister's tongue is too much around here. Who do you think you are, a pair of queens? Just remember what Huey Long said, that every man's a king, and I'm the king around here. And don't you forget it. My place is all cleared up now. You want me to clear yours?
Like, this is
Exactly.
not Al Pacino in The Godfather.
You think I'm skimming off the top, Mike?
You're unlucky.
You goddamn guineas really make me laugh. I do you a favor and take Freddie in when you're having a bad time, and then you try to push me out.
Wait a minute. You took Freddie in because the Corleone family bankrolled your casino because the Molinari family on the coast guaranteed his safety. Now, we're talking business. Let's talk business.
Yeah, let's talk business, Mike. First of all, you're all done. The Coyote family don't even have that kind of muscle anymore. The Godfather is sick, right? You're getting chased out of New York by Barzini and the other families. What do you think is going on here? You think you can come to my hotel and take over? I talked to Barzini. I can make a deal with him and still keep my hotel.
Is that why you slapped my brother around in public?
Oh, no, that was nothing, Mike. Now, Mo didn't mean nothing by that. Sure, he flies off the handle once in a while, but Mo and me were good friends, right, Mo, huh?
I got a business to run. I gotta kick asses sometimes to make it run right. We had a little argument, Freddie and I, so I had to straighten him out.
You straightened my brother out.
He was banging cocktail waitresses 2 at a time. Players couldn't get a drink at the table. What's wrong with you?
I leave for New York tomorrow. Think about a price.
You're right. This is a different thing, but still good in a different, awkward way. Now, something interesting about this director, too, I think Yorgos, I don't know if you ever saw this film. I watched it once again because I like Colin Farrel, and I saw it when it came out. But did you see The Lobster?
I did not see it. In fact, after I was done with this movie, I started watching The Lobster, but I got about a quarter of the way through, and then I had some other stuff come up. But I am dying to get back to it because it's intriguing. It's kind of the same thing, and even the dialogue in that, the dialogue doesn't feel more awkward, or doesn't feel as awkward, but the performances still kind of have that kind of just deadpan, at least as far as I got, that deadpan kind of boring delivery. Boring. I say boring. It's not boring. That's the thing. I don't know how else to describe it.
Right. I mean, it's almost like there's a monotone nature to how things play out, but it's not. But it doesn't lose rhythm. So I know that sounds contradictory,
Right.
but there's still something there that, like we said, there's a curiosity and something that kind of captures your imagination. I think it has to do with me a lot of the questioning about the relationships. And I think what he's good at doing, and I'll compare Killing of a Sacred Deer against The Lobster because they're his two films back to back, is that he creates these worlds that are real but obscure. Like they feel like real worlds, but they're very different from the world that we might know, right?
Right.
Because the characters are so... Like in the Lobster, the world is what sets it apart, and I think in the Killing of a Sacred Deer, it's the relationships and the questioning of what's going to happen. But I think he does a really good job directorially at putting his spin on it, a look at how he sees the world and how he creates stories and characters, and it's very different from the traditional. We mentioned the acting, but I just think in storytelling in general, as films, like he's got a little unique value that he puts on it. You know, a lot of times we always talk about, people always talk about putting your kind of fingerprint on the story, or like borrowing from other people and then putting your 30 or 40, 50% of your uniqueness onto the story. I think he does that really well. And it's his. I can't think of something, at least right now, that I've seen that has kind of that unique spin like these two films in a way that he's been able to do it. So I kind of applaud him in being able to create these kind of unique worlds with these really intriguing characters, even in a mundane approach of the dialogue, like you mentioned.
Yeah, it's a little, it's a risk. It's a total risk, I think, because it almost dares you to like the movie, even though the acting is not what typically you think of typical acting. Like it really, it's interesting because, like you mentioned the score, and I did feel like it was the score to The Shining. Like it felt a lot very Kubrick-esque, and the story and the score and all these other elements are almost guiding us along, and the acting is almost a curiosity because it's very strange that I'm enjoying this as much with these performances. And I can't really explain it other than that. If people haven't seen it, I think they need to stop right now, pause this podcast, and go watch it to know what we're talking about, because it's just such a strange world we live in. And it is a huge risk, because if you have Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman in your movie and you tell them to emote less and you direct them to tone it down, you better be damn confident in your story and your ability to tell the story, because you have these A-list actors, these guys who are professionals, and they could, it'd be very easy just to hang your hat on them and let them do all the heavy lifting. But Yorgos, I'm kind of blown away. I still don't quite understand why I like the movie so much.
I think part of it too is we were talking about this comparison to something like The Shining. I think we both kind of fell into the Kubrickian style, but I think a big part of that is how he uses the push-in zoom. I mean, and the symmetry in the shots, and a lot of the camera movements, where he's using a lot of the steady cam down hallways and just constant moves for like 20 seconds. And then those kind of still shots with you see, it's not a push in with the dolly. It's actually just a zoom in to the character, which is very, very Kubrickian, right? Like we look at The Shining, and all those are those zoom push-ins, those telephoto zoom lens push-ins. So I think the way in which he constructs the world technically kind of helps assist some of the flatter delivery of the characters. But you're right. I mean, being able to use such big names like Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman and telling them to, but it's also the obscurities. Like, we'll give you an example of like a scene where Colin Farrell comes home from work and he's with his wife in bed, and she just lays down and basically says something about being like comatose. General anesthesia. Like imitating what it would be like to be knocked out. And then he basically, takes advantage of her.
That's what gets him off. It's bizarre.
Yeah. So like these eccentric behaviors in this flatline, what seems to be a flatline world, kind of help punch it up in it's I keep using this word, but it's that curiosity. Like, what is this?
Well, and when he tries to share the secrets with he has the secret game with his son, and the secret he shares is so over the top and wild, and it's just kind of a throwaway thing. I was actually trying to explain this film to my girlfriend today, and that was a terrible mistake, because this movie cannot be explained. Like, she's like, so what's it about? And I tried to explain it. I'm like, there's nothing I can do that can explain it to you. So I gave her the little anecdote about his about the story of him going in and masturbating his father.
Yeah.
And how that's his big
that'll
that's his secret.
pique people's curiosity or make them nervous about watching it.
Right, exactly. And that's the way he does it. It's just, I mean, why not just say I cheated on my medical school exam or something like that, Like something less dangerous, something less life-altering, and something, I don't know. It was bizarre, and he just throws it out there, and then it's gone. Like, that alone would be the subject of an entire film. Like, that would be an inciting incident in some film, and instead, it's just a throwaway line.
It's like a throwaway.
It's just part of the scene.
Yeah. I mean, it's the incentives to get... He thinks his son's faking it. So the storyline here is basically that after Martin, who is the young man that... what we end up finding out is that Martin, his father, was killed by Stephen in an accident on the operating table. Stephen was essentially inebriated and had some drinks, and it's thought that he essentially, because of his what's the word I'm looking for? His unprofessionalism killed Martin's father. And I think he feels guilt for it, right? He feels guilt for it. He tries to pretend like he doesn't take blame for it and pushes it off on the anesthesiologist. But yeah, which is funny, a little scene. But essentially, that's why he has created this relationship with Stephen. So it has nothing to do with the two of them being intimate in any way. It just has the fact that Stephen, the surgeon, feels guilty for not being professional and like letting Martin's father die on the operating table. And I think that's I don't know if it's the first scene, but the very first scene that it gets into, I'm imagining that's actually Martin's father. I don't know because we don't see anything other than a real close-up shot for like a minute and a half of a heartbeat. And this is real. This is not a fabricated, animated shot.
I was wondering how they shot this because it's very clearly an open, like a human being's chest wide open and the heart is beating inside. Did they get permission to film this? I don't know how they got this.
Unless they're tricking me and they've magically created a practical effect that looks like a life beating heart. When I watched
I'll tell you what, if
I got
that's
uncomfortable after
effect, then whoever did that should go down in cinematic history as the greatest of all time because that was unbelievable.
The rhythmic beat of the heart is amazing, and the reality of it. But it goes for like a minute or more.
Yeah.
But the concept to me, I think, is that's Martin's dad because once they leave, Stephen and the anesthesiologist, his friend, are talking about a watch.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about a watch, and this man has died on a table, and they're just, doing their normal conversation about what their watch is and how deep it is and how many meters it goes, and someone's just died. And
that was the funniest part of the whole watch thing to me is the first question out of Colin Farrell's mouth when he sees the watch is what's the water resistance?
Yeah.
Like, have you ever? I didn't know watches had water resistance. Like, that's crazy.
I mean, I knew they did, but I've never been like, what's the water resistance? 100 meters, 200 meters. I've never paid attention, It
almost felt a little like American Psycho where they're comparing business cards. Only this was more in admiration than frustration. Like it's, his card is made out of pure ivory or whatever it was, and it has this typeface, and it kind of felt like that. It's like the most mundane details that no one would notice for some reason is attractive. And that's the whole movie, though.
But
like
after just losing somebody on the table, you know what I mean? Like you just lost somebody on the table, and the next thing you're talking about is the water resistance of a watch.
Right.
And I imagine, and I've always thought about this too, and I imagine that's how you have to be a little bit callous as a doctor to a degree. I mean, you're dealing with this every day. I think if you let that sit for too long or for forever, you would never get through the downside of everything, right? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it feels like that's just kind of their day-to-day deal. They lost somebody and they got to move on because tomorrow there's going to be somebody new.
Right.
So after this opening scene is where we initially meet Martin and Stephen, and they're at a cafe. They're at a restaurant. And this is where, just like we mentioned already, the questioning starts to come into play, and who's this kid and why do they have a relationship? And we don't really get a lot of answers other than he gives him a gift, a watch. He gives Martin, the young boy, a watch, and Martin gives him a hug, and it's this awkward thing. And I started going here, like maybe this is where it's not a sexual thing and there's a weird companionship there for something else, but I didn't know what, because he's still a little resistant. What's his character all about? Why do you think he's really feels guilty for letting his father die, or do you just think he's got himself in this position where he's not sure what to do with this kid who's kind of starting to infiltrate the family, or him?
I think he feels guilty. I think it's mainly not necessarily for letting him die, but the fact that he was drinking before the surgery.
Yeah.
I think he feels guilty, and that's why he's giving him presents. And Martin even says later on, you've given me so many gifts, and I've given you nothing. So I think this is an ongoing thing. He's continually giving him gifts and trying to make up for it, and almost to an extent trying to be a father figure to him at a distance. And the part that really solidified it to me that, okay, this is not like a lover situation, was when he said, I want you to come meet my wife and kids.
Yeah.
That just, because this whole thing has been built up as a huge secret.
Yeah.
Like Martin comes to the hospital and he kind of admonishes him for coming to the hospital. And then now he's like, well, come meet my family. So it's like you said, it's just a mystery. There's a curiosity going like, what in the hell is happening here? And it takes us through the entire first act, which thank God it's there, because honestly, if it wasn't there, I think that first act would be very hard to get through.
I mean,
instead it's intriguing, and I can't take my eyes off it.
And after he invites him to see the family, like also Martin starts like he has got a cell phone number. He's calling him and saying thank you, and like and it starts to become, for me, it started to become uncomfortable. Do you know what I mean? Like the first part, I was like, okay, I can see where his guilt comes in and he feels bad and he's left this kid without a father. But as it progresses and Martin keeps calling him and then keeps showing up and like, or comes to the house and like comes to the hospital and like is just kind of randomly, not randomly even, deliberately following him to, it becomes a little bit, it starts to get crazy. Because as soon as he invites him to come to his house and meet his mother, it gets very awkward.
Well, I almost thought it was going to be like a Fatal Attraction-esque type movie at this point, because Martin is showing up everywhere, and you really do want to just smack the kid. He's so good at being kind of creepy, and he's also befriending Colin Farrell's daughter and kind of leading her along, and it almost felt like he's trying to manipulate this family and manipulate their emotions and what they're going through. And so I thought that's what it was going to be. When he goes to Martin's house, that was a bizarre scenario. But again, it was like, it almost felt like, obviously Martin wants him to be his father. But it leads to a question later on, because later on the story changes a little bit. Martin's motivation has changed. And I don't know if he had that motivation from the get-go or if that was a plan B. If what he was doing to the kids and the wife later on, if that's a plan B because he couldn't get Colin Farrell to be his father figure, to take that place. So I don't know. I'm interested to get your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, because he ends up inviting him to come to dinner, to which he accepts, I think in some ways reluctantly, once again just kind of feeling guilt-stricken. So he reluctantly goes to this dinner, and Martin's there with his mom, played by Alicia Silverstone, making her little appearance in the film.
Her triumphant return.
From Clueless.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the Aerosmith videos of the 90s.
Yep.
But they have dinner, and this is awkward here. He says he'd like to watch a movie. Remember this? He goes, I'd like to watch a movie. Can you stick around and watch this movie with us? And he reluctantly does it. And then the awkward, like his mom's in on it too, to a degree. She's, because then they start watching this movie, and then Martin goes, hey, I'm going to go to bed. I'm tired. He's setting him up. He's setting up his mom. He's like the wingman to his mother.
100%. 100%.
On a married man.
And that's, I think that's why, I mean, obviously he wanted him to be a father figure, and his plan failed, right?
Right.
I mean, and that's why he went on to the next phase of it, right?
I would agree. Yeah, I think at this point, the mother does not succeed in luring Stephen, or Colin Farrell's character, into an affair, which is, I think,
by sucking on his finger.
So he ends up leaving, rightfully so. He ends up leaving. But I think, now Martin's plan has failed. I think to get Stephen to be his father, he really believes it too. Like, he's not just like, oh, maybe if they just saw each other, they'd hang out and start to grow and build a relationship, he really thinks, oh, I think my mom can do this, and she can convince him to be, but it doesn't work. So it's a failed plan. And it leads, I think it's a good point. I think in the story, it leads to the next kind of drastic measures for this young, manipulative, conniving, smart, and creepy kid.
Because I think the whole point is he lost a part of his family, and so he needs that to be replaced.
Yeah.
And if that can't be replaced, then it's got to be evened out. I think that's kind of what he's going for.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's exactly what he's going for. But it ends up failing. And then the next kind of stepping stone into the story is essentially that you start to see Stephen's family start to be sick. They start to become sick. This was where I had questions. What was Martin doing? What was Martin doing to the family? Like, how was he poisoning them, or how did this was never clear to me.
It was never clear, and I'm kind of glad it wasn't, because it almost feels like if there's an explanation, it would ruin the trick. Like, it would ruin the world that was built for this movie. Like, it's almost because once it becomes clear, Colin Farrell doesn't accept it right away. He doesn't accept that Martin is making his family sick. But as soon as he tells Nicole Kidman, she just accepts it. And the kids, somehow they found out, or they were told or something, and they automatically accept it. So I'm kind of glad that they didn't explain what he was doing, because it made the world more, not realistic, because it's not realistic, but it made it more believable, I guess. And it's almost like a magician. If you tell how the trick is done, it's not quite as powerful.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Because now, as I'm looking back on it, you don't really care what Martin might have done to put Stephen's family in this predicament, or to make them sick. You just know that it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you're right. There's this strange scene as it kind of continues to build, where he's obsessed with hair, like armpit hair, and like he shows up at the hospital. This scene to me was so weird. He shows up at the hospital and tells Stephen, "Hey, I don't feel good. It hurts. It hurts right here." And he's pointing to his heart.
Because he knows that he's a heart surgeon.
But I also think this is an on-the-nose symbolism, a metaphor to his character, which is like he feels the pain of his dad's loss, right? And only Stephen can fix it, or at least in his mind, only Stephen can fix it.
One more weird thing that happens in this movie. Martin tells him to take off his shirt, tells Colin Farrell to take off his shirt so we can see how much chest and armpit hair he has. And Colin Farrell just does it. I mean, this kid shows up at your work unannounced and is kind of just bossing him around. I mean, if someone showed up at your work, even if it's someone you felt immense guilt and you were trying to help them out, and they told you to take off your shirt in your place of business, I tell them to get the hell out of it. I mean, it's just bizarre how much he not enables, but he kind of just goes along with whatever Martin wants at the beginning.
Yeah, he succumbs.
On the other hand, he's so hard on his son, and that's another kind of a thing. He I don't want to say he's obsessed, but he mentions how his son needs to get a haircut. And later on, I actually wrote this down because I thought it was so freaking funny. When he thinks that his son is faking this, and I actually think at this point in the movie, he's desperately hoping that he's faking it.
Yeah.
I think he's starting to believe that he's not, but he desperately wants to know. So he says, you got to get up, or you got to stand up, or whatever, or I will shave your head and make you eat your hair. I'm not joking. I will make you eat your hair. Like, What the fuck kind of thing is that to say to your 10-year-old kid?
Well, there was a line earlier at the dinner table where they're talking about his hair, and his son says, "I promise I'll cut my hair." So you know that there's been a No, no, you're right. That's a hell of a line to deliver to your son in a serious tone. I could see in a joking manner if you were going, I'm going to make you eat it. I'm going to make you eat it. But like the way he delivers it is like it's legit. He's serious.
It's aggressive.
It's aggressive, yeah. But to get to that, like his son, like after Martin shows up at the hospital and does all the tests, it's the next morning where his son, Stephen's son, wakes up and like you were alluding to, says that he can't walk, and they think he's faking it. And then they take him to the hospital, and basically, it appears as though he's okay. They can't. He's still walking. His legs are still working, and then they do some tests, and they basically let him go. And then he starts going down the stairs with his mom, and then he falls, and this is like the end of it. He literally, his legs stop working, so his son cannot walk.
And there's one thing I want to say about the performance. Again, I don't want to keep beating a dead horse here, but if you woke up one morning and you couldn't get out of bed because your legs didn't work, would you just sit there and be like, my legs don't work, I can't move? I mean, just the sheer cavalier attitude toward it is just bizarre. This is the tone of the whole movie for me. It's just this bizarre reaction to crazy things, crazy huge events that would just petrify anybody, and the kid's just like, yeah, I can't walk.
There's a weird acceptance to things that you wouldn't accept without such reluctance. Like these kind of things you would, even like the parents, like Nicole Kidman and Colin Farrell, their acceptance of like their kid just starting to go through these random paralysis and like it's like an expected thing.
Right.
It's like what? And you're right, but I think it's what creates the weirdness of the world with these characters. I don't think it's because it's a bad performance, you know?
Not at all. And I definitely think it's deliberate.
Yes. And so it kind of makes it even more, man, that curiosity word, Alan. I'm constantly curious about what is happening in this world. Their son can't walk. He gets tested. Nobody has any answers. They're all curious what's happening. Martin shows up the next day at the hospital, and he's in the son's room while Nicole Kidman and Colin Farrell come in. He's already there. He's visiting the son. And then he asked Colin Farrell to go see him at the cafeteria of the hospital. And they have this conversation. And this is where things start to get it. It's almost prophetic in the sense that the young Martin kid starts telling him about what's going to happen to his son. First, the paralysis. And then, a few days will go by. And you have to, he's telling Colin Farrell's character, you have to decide who you're going to kill out of your children. And once the bleeding in the eyes starts to happen, it's over. This is where it starts to have, for me, it started to have a little bit more religious, what's the word, subtext to it. I was
going to ask you about that because I was never raised religious or anything. So a lot of this stuff kind of goes over my head, but you could see like a lot of the shadows. It was almost like the camera was put at a place where the shadows, like there was a fan on the ceiling, and the shadow formed a cross, and then there's some other religious symbolism, like some halos that could be interpreted as halos. So I was wondering, I was going to ask you, how thick in the symbolism, in the religious symbolism, are we in the weeds here?
As he started, for me, like I started thinking about various Bible stories. You have these Judeo-Christian things like Abraham with his son Isaac, and he has to make a choice because God has randomly told him to kill his son. I started thinking of things along that line, and then as we got further into, and it's not a direct correlation, but I started thinking about, okay, there's something going on here that's deeper literature, whether it's Christianity or the Bible or Buddhism. I don't know. It had something there.
Well, I know it's based on a Greek myth.
And
too.
I did a little research after, and I did find that Greek mythology correlation, and I could see that. But for me, like the religious subtext was there, and I just wasn't sure or wasn't clear how it played out. But the actual title of the film, like you mentioned, is based on various Greek plays and mythology.
And I also think it's pretty. It's called Iphigenia at Aulis. I want to say is the Greek tragedy, and I don't know. From what I understand, it's very loosely based on it. So I don't think it follows it beat by beat by any stretch. But I think that is the roots of it.
Yeah, and particularly towards the end, and I don't want to jump too far, but I guess I will. I mean, when he's making the choice, he puts up all three family members as sacrificial lambs. Like he ran in a random approach to killing them. Like he has everybody. That was a shocker at the end too, by the way. That's the other thing. His wife, Nicole Kidman, it's like they'd done it before. Had they done it before? Because they have this conversation. And maybe we're getting too far at the end. I wanted to cover a couple things in the middle before we got to the end, but it felt like they had done this before. Do you know what I mean? Like this was something.
It certainly felt. I mean, to me, it felt like it was too casual. It was much too casual. Their conversations. The most interesting part to me, though, as this progressed, was how all three of them kind of. I mean, for lack of a better term, they were almost auditioning to be the perfect child or the perfect wife. And, I mean, even at one point, Nicole Kidman says, the right choice to make here, because Colin Farrell is forced to choose one of the three family members to die.
And this, by the way, is
him, she says, the best choice is to choose one of the children because we can always make another child.
Yeah.
And I thought that was actually kind of comical. And some of the things these guys were, these people were doing was kind of comical. And how they're kind of jockeying to not be the one who gets killed.
Yeah. And before we get into the very end there, one thing to relay in the story is that his daughter is now suffering from the same symptoms that his son is. She can't walk. And she had actually built a bit of a relationship with Martin once he was introduced into the family, and she kind of likes him. And she's this young 13-year-old girl. And the other thing that was like these weird throwaways is like why everyone's why Colin Farrell is telling all his friends about her menstrual cycle.
Right.
What is going on? Like, what are we? Why are we bringing that up with? It was just so strange.
It's just so some weird. They're so casual and cavalier about these weird subjects.
And there's a weird, intimate kind of relationship between Martin and his daughter and Steven's daughter.
And it feels like Martin is totally manipulating her 100%. I don't think he really has any interest in her. I don't really know his motivation by going after her, honestly.
She comes straight out and says it. She basically gets near naked. She's in a bra. And she basically tells him that she loves him. And then he goes, I have to go. Like, he just leaves.
Right.
So, he's doing some form of manipulation on her. But then she ends up in the hospital. And so both the daughter and the son are in the hospital. The team of doctors are trying to figure out what's wrong with them. They can't walk. Their legs aren't functioning. And so as it gets closer towards the end, his wife, what I didn't get is like after both kids are in the hospital, though Nicole Kidman's is like this. She's this detective. She's trying to figure out what's going on. She's going to the anesthesiologist. She's going to Steven's other partners at the hospital, trying to figure out if he's got problems or if he's been drinking or if he's been incompetent in his job. And she's trying to figure it out. And my question is, because we talked about the end, is why did she care so much in the middle? And then at the end, she just gave up and was like, hey, if we need more kids, we can have more kids.
I thought the same thing. I didn't quite understand that. There's a lot in here that I don't quite understand, but for some weird reason, I'm okay with not really understanding. Like, there are plot holes, and maybe they're not plot holes. Maybe they are explained, but to me, they're plot holes, but it doesn't bother me like a normal film would.
I hated how aggressive she was in the not in the traditional sense of the word, but in the sense of her willingness and determination to find out what was going on. And then at the end, she just is like so submissive to him. So
Right.
there's like this change in, first I got to find out, I got to do all these things, in so much that I'm going to go to Steven's anesthesiologist friend, give him a handy.
Right.
And then to try to get information about Steven and what's been happening with Steven at work. Is he drinking?
Right.
Is he doing these things? What's this Martin kid? Why do they have a relationship? And then at the end, she's all submissive. She's like, oh, yeah, I'll put a bag on my head with duct tape around. I'll dress in the black dress and you can attempt to shoot me. Like, what? What? Because she was so
the only thing
upset with him before.
Is Colin Farrell. Steven is that character's name, right? Colin Farrell's character. Yeah. So Steven kidnaps Martin and is basically going to beat the shit out of him until he takes off this curse or whatever's going on, whatever he's done to injure his kids. He's going to beat the shit out of him until he does it. Nicole Kidman takes the exact opposite approach. She comes down, she cleans his wounds, she kisses his feet, and it was almost like
that's
an act of deference.
That's another religious piece of imagery. Like
that one I got.
The kissing
I
of the
got
feet,
that one pretty
right?
good.
Yeah.
Like that was pretty on the nose. But I think when she did that and it still didn't work, like her deference didn't affect this thing at all. I think maybe then she realized there's nothing I can do. That's the only thing I can think that would explain her turn. I don't know if it's accurate or not, but that's what I came up with.
I mean, there was still confusion, but I think I see where you're going with it. And then, and like I said, this is going to require a lot of, I think, a rewatch to really try to break down even more depth into what he's trying to say. You know, what Yargos is trying to say. I mean, he's Greek, so it makes sense that he would borrow elements of Greek mythology. No,
right?
Or am I just stereotyping now?
It's like, no, it makes sense.
It's like people say, "Hey, Gabe, you're Dutch, so you should only tell stories from Dutch lore." The answer to that is
Christianity symbols at all.
I have no idea what Dutch stories are. So
I don't either. I didn't know they had any.
Maybe they do. I'm sure everybody does.
I'm sure they do.
So, what ends up happening is Steven essentially kidnaps Martin, puts him in the basement, beats the shit out of him, starts yelling at him, getting upset with him, trying to figure out what the current situation is and what Martin has done to cause his children to be paralyzed and possibly die in the near future. And like you said, Nicole Kidman takes the opposite approach where she kind of soothes him and takes care of him and bandages him up. So I didn't get what's going on. I was still intrigued, but I was just, something Martin said though stood out, and he talks about something about metaphors. He says something about metaphors. I'm trying to remember the exact thing he says. He's sitting there and he's been beat to shit by Steven, and he says, "It's my example." He's all bloodied and cut up. It's a metaphor. I don't know entirely what it meant, but it sparked my thought process of what he's trying. Is this the deeper meaning of where he's trying to go with this story?
Yeah, I noticed that too. That was when I knew that I was going to have to watch this thing again. because I feel like there's so much in there that I'm probably missing that I really want to understand. Like the whole spaghetti thing too, where he's eating spaghetti. So Nicole Kidman's, this is a little bit earlier on in the film. She goes to Martin's house to talk to him and kind of reason with him, I think. And he tells the story about how after his dad died, everyone would tell him that he eats spaghetti just like his dad did. Like, obviously there's a metaphor or something going on there that gives us some insight into the story. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. And even like the little weird anecdotes about, telling all the friends that the daughter had a period, or telling the story about masturbating the father, all these weird, big statements that are said that are just treated so cavalier. I think there's something more there too. That's why I got to go back and watch this thing again, for maybe even a third time after I watch it again.
Because I think that after he beats the shit out of Martin, and the two kids are having a conversation, and they're starting to, in their own way, understand what's happening, which is they know they're going to die. They basically understand, or they have the possibility of dying. And they start feeling guilt of their own, because then the young boy, Steven's son, starts to want to cut his hair and like do things that his dad says. And he's like, I want to be a cardiologist like you. And all these things that are like, wow, this is like, there's a little deeper meaning there between that relationship. Like the son's realizing what's happening and he wants to please his father.
Well, and it's interesting because the daughter actually, I don't think she at first thought she had to worry about that because she's got this thing going on with Martin. I think she was convinced that Martin would just save her.
She even goes down. So while Martin's, by the way, tied up in the basement of Steven's house after he's been killed, just beating the hell out of him, she goes down. She crawls down on her arms, basically dragging herself, and goes down and tells Martin to save her. Once again, there's a religious connotation there. There's a religious tie-in. Has to do with the inability to walk and literally dragging yourself to a quote-unquote savior. Right? And I thought
that was kind of funny, actually, seeing the kids drag themselves around like a zombie with no legs.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was kind of comical to me.
I don't know the deeper meaning, but there are stories in the Bible of people who are paralyzed that crawl and try to walk towards the Savior for a touch. That they can, by his touch, they can then walk. So once again, it's kind of inundated with these little religious symbols in some way or another. But then essentially they get down there to the end, and Stephen has to make a decision, and the way that he makes the decision is that they do some kind of, well, first off, before we get to that, right before this, his son's eyes start to bleed. So once again, this prophetic statement from Martin that happened earlier about the eyes bleeding means that death is coming. Mm-hmm. His son's eyes start bleeding, and everyone says, oh, he's dying. And then the ceremony at the end, where Nicole Kidman says, I'll put my black dress on, and all these. The next cut of the scene is the son, the daughter, and the wife tied up with duct tape. He puts a bag over their head, and he spins around with a shotgun and dizzies himself to try to hit one of them.
I thought that was kind of comical too. I actually thought there was a lot of funny stuff in here, and I don't know if that makes me a dark or a bad person, because I don't think a lot of this was meant to be funny. But when he's spinning around with the gun, it was kind of funny, man. Like he's stumbling around, and
I thought it
was comical.
I thought it was funny when he missed twice.
Yeah.
Because you're totally
obviously he's gonna miss. Like, what are the odds of actually hitting one of them?
Yeah, I mean they're separated out in a triangular fashion.
Right.
And he's in the middle with a beanie over his head and a shotgun spinning in circles. You know what it reminds me of? It's like remember when you were a kid and you did the baseball bat where you put the bat on your forehead and you run in circles and you try to get all dizzy? That's exactly what it was. So I think there is. I think you're right. I don't think it's meant to be comical, but there's some comedy tonality in that scene. When he misses, though, he shoots again, he misses, and then finally he hits the kid, the young boy, and then you just see that the young boy is now, you see the blood dripping from his chest. That wasn't funny. That was kind of dark.
That was definitely not funny. That was sad.
It was sad. But it's a trip because he's playing with your mind. What I find interesting is the last scene after the boy dies. So he's killed his son, right? And the last scene, they're at the same cafe that that Stephen and Martin were at the beginning, and it's Stephen, his wife, and his daughter. The boy is obviously dead, and then Martin walks in, and walks right by him. He goes and sits down at the bar, the counter, across from him, and just stares at him. And they look at each other, and then the family gets up and leaves, and Martin sits at the bar alone.
Yep.
It was just, I was like, wait, what? What is going?
It didn't feel like an ending at all.
I wasn't sure. This wraps up how I kind of feel about it mostly, which is like, I just wasn't sure. I liked it. This is the thing. I liked the movie, but I wasn't sure how to interpret it. And after doing this research, like we had talked about the Greek mythology, I had some ideas about Judeo-Christian beliefs and Christianity when it comes to the Bible and some tie-ins there. But it was so different from a lot of things I've seen. I don't know if I liked it just because it was different or if I liked it because of how it was executed. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And so this definitely is going to require a bit of a rewatch.
I think so too. Since you watched it, have you been thinking about it? Have you been mulling it over in your head?
Been trying to think of definitely like trying to break it down. But like we talked about, this is going to require a few rewatches. And the thing about it is like I'm interested in rewatching it. Sometimes you see a movie, right? And even if you don't understand it or I enjoyed it enough to rewatch it and look at it with a more analytical eye. So, I mean, I think overall I liked it. Give me a little, like a summary of kind of where you're at and kind of where you're sitting on it.
I agree with you. We've watched 20-something movies for this podcast. A lot of them, honestly, I haven't given another thought to, and I don't like. I had to go back and even remember what the name and look it up what the name of Heart 8 was. So there are some movies, and this is like this. In regular life, you watch movies. Some have an impact, some don't. This one is so strange because it had an impact on me. I haven't really been able to stop thinking about it since I watched it, but I can't point to any one thing and tell you this is why I liked it, because I don't understand why I liked it. I do know I didn't just like it. I actually loved this movie. I was intrigued. I couldn't take my eyes off it. I wanted to know what was going on, and I don't quite understand. I saw all the pieces. I see them all, and I can look at them and analyze them, but I don't know why when put together, it created this piece of art. I don't know how he did it, and I don't know why it's affected me. I enjoyed it. I honestly can't wait to watch it again. Again, if you haven't watched it, definitely just stop everything and go watch it because it's bizarre. It's not for everyone, though. That's the thing.
No.
I think that if you're a type of person who really wants to know how the magician does his trick, I think it's going to drive you crazy. I think it is sad. It's a tragedy, and the ending might leave a lot to be desired for some people, maybe unsatisfying, I should say. So it's not for everybody, but I definitely think it's a movie everyone should watch because it will have an effect on you, and I am very interested to kind of know what other people think of this thing.
Yeah, because I also don't think it's, sometimes you'll get movies that are weird just for the sake of being weird. Like
yes.
They're trying to be weird for their own, with really strong intention just to be different. And this, to me, doesn't have that. It doesn't have that weird to be
Right.
weird vibe. So I'm 100% with you on that. And I would say, yeah, drop it and go check it out. Give me a little bit of a rating on the film overall.
I'm going 8.4, and you know I like the gory stuff, so I'm going 8.4 bleeding eyes.
He's coming in with an 8. That's pretty high.
It's very high for me.
That's pretty high.
In fact, the whole time I was watching it, I was thinking about what I was going to rate it, and when I was done, I was tempted to go lower, but I was like, no, I was tempted to go lower just because I'm usually a low grader, and I was going to go somewhere in the 7s, but then the more I thought about it, the more I realized I actually did like it that much. Like, I really, really love this movie.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back, and like I said, I immediately turned on The Lobster, and I'm dying to get back to it. I'm going to go back and see his old films, too, because I'm interested to see how he got to this point.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of that from you where you're using the word love in a movie.
Very rarely do I do that. This and Texas Chainsaw, that's about it.
This is a rare occurrence for Alan.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Usually I'm the film apologist.
Is this going to be the second week in a row where I rate it higher than you?
It could be. Let me give you some trivia, and then we'll get into it. I want to run through a couple pieces of trivia, and then if you have something that I didn't capture, go ahead and chime in. A couple details on the film. This is a UK Ireland co-production. So filming locations here in the U.S. though, and there's a couple pieces of trivia like we mentioned before. It's kind of based on some Greek mythology. Interesting piece of trivia. We were talking about this before, and what I'm reading here is that the heart surgery scenes in the film are real.
Interesting.
So they were filmed during an operation on a real patient who was undergoing quadruple bypass surgery, which Colin Farrell attended. So
Wow.
that made me a little queasy, actually, because it sat. You know why? Because it sat for so long. It wasn't just a 5-second shot of
Right.
it. It was like a minute, and it just made me
Well, it was interesting how they did it because the movie opens with just a black screen and just the music playing, and that goes on for a long time, and then it hard cuts to open heart surgery and a close-up, and it holds on it and kind of barely pulls back very slowly, and it holds on it for a long time. It's a very bold, interesting opening to a movie that really, I don't know, we don't see any more gore throughout the movie, so it's just interesting. It was a weird choice.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of gore. You could consider this a tragedy drama. I mean, there's a bit of horror in it, not in a traditional sense of slasher type horror, but there's some psychological horror to it.
For sure.
The film, Colin Farrell said he felt nauseous after reading the script for the film.
I can see why.
The film was in competition for the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival in 2017. Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman both won awards in the official competition for the film, won the Screenplay Award. So it got some recognition from one of the biggest festivals in the world. Bob, by the way, is Steven's son, Colin Farrell's son, played by Sonny Suljic. He is also in a movie that we did our very first podcast on called Mid-90s, which is a great film. And
there was a very Danny Torrance vibe to him from The Shining.
He did. I mean, I'm telling you, there were a lot of Kubrick-type vibes to how this was put together. But he's the only American in the film. Everybody, because you have Colin Farrell from Ireland, and then Nicole's from
And I'm glad that they let Colin Farrell just do his regular accent.
Yeah. Yeah, because everybody else had, even Nicole Kidman played with an American accent.
Right.
I mean, she can have her Australian one. I feel like I don't hear her with her Australian accent very often. It feels, do I?
Very rarely. It's almost only in interviews or on Saturday Night Live or something.
I feel like all the characters she plays, though, they always feel very American in the accent. It says, at the 1 minute 26 mark, pairs of windows resembling eyes follow the two parents from their bedroom through the house to the basement. This could symbolize that the entity making the children sick is observing the actions of the parents.
That's like the Amityville house.
I know. So now it's the house. That's too much for me.
Yeah, that's going a little too far.
Who's making this bullshit?
And
up?
I know you're looking at the same thing, but in the last scene, this might kind of explain what's going on with Martin, and kind of explain the last scene, where the family is shown walking into a wash of bright light away from Martin, who sits in darkness. This may symbolize that Martin has made a pact with dark forces and will remain affected by them forever.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
maybe he made a pact with
there's
the devil.
something there. Those are things that I'll definitely explore on the rewatch. There's definitely more depth that we haven't covered. This could actually be one of the podcasts that warrants a follow-up.
I agree.
So here's an interesting thing, though, the killing of a sacred deer. So here is our Rotten Tomatoes score, Alan. We've got a 79% from the critics. It's not exceptionally high. It's not bad. It's good.
Yeah, it might be about what I expect.
65 from the audience.
That does not surprise me, actually. Like I said, I don't think this movie's for everybody.
No, it's not. And our IMDb score is a 7.1. So out of 105,000 reviews or ratings, they're at a 7.1. That's probably pretty accurate.
Yeah.
And you came in at 8.4.
8.4.
Wow. I think that's one of the highest scores you've ever given.
I think it is. Yeah, it's pretty close.
So what's funny about this is, like we mentioned, like this was just a quick nonchalant, hey, I'm in bed, I'm going to watch Netflix. Let me pull, oh, this looks interesting. Next thing I know, I'm messaging you like, hey, can we do this on the next podcast? And then before you know it, tonight, Alan's like, one of my favorite movies ever.
It really is. This is one of my favorite movies that I've seen in a long time, no doubt.
Well, I'm glad. So it's categorized drama, horror, mystery.
And it is on Netflix, by the way. So you don't have to buy it. You don't have to rent it. It's on Netflix. So is The Lobster.
Yep, both are on Netflix. Yeah, I think Yargos Lanthimos has an interesting style. I think he's intriguing to me as a filmmaker. The things that he does. I had seen The Lobster before I had seen this. I didn't know that he had done both until after I even watched this, because I just wasn't paying attention to the director. And I liked The Lobster, and I liked this movie too. Enough that I started it late, right? Like I did. It was late at night, and I had put on Netflix, hit it on, and you start to get tired. It's like midnight.
Mm-hmm.
You start to get tired. And usually I'll just let the movie go and I'll fall asleep to it. But this one I couldn't. What I had to do was I don't want to miss anything, so I'm going to throw on a shitty movie or whatever.
Right.
And so I can stop this one and pick it back up.
Good choice.
So, not that I couldn't have gone back, but you know what I mean? You're like, I want to stop it exactly where I know I'm going to be so I can pick it back up. I liked it a lot too. I thought it was a really interesting, we talk about, indie films and art house films. Like this to me is an art house film. It's not it's got that artistic vibe. This is built by an auteur. This is built by somebody who has a clear vision. Whether we can interpret exactly what that vision is or isn't is up to us, I guess. But that's what he leaves it up to. He leaves it up to us to figure out what's even happening and constantly ask those mystery box questions. So I liked it for that, and I think he's a very intriguing filmmaker. And like you, I would be interested to see his other work that I haven't seen up to this point.
Well, and that's what I like about A24 is it feels like they are all in on filmmakers like that. And that's why, I mean, at some point it'd be fun to do like a series or something of A24 films, because each one is different, but they're all, I mean, all the ones I've seen, again, I haven't seen them all, they're all really good in really different ways, and they're all very unique.
No, I agree, and that's funny because that's what we kind of said at the beginning of the podcast, and I'll kind of say it again, which is when I saw A24, there was a bit of excitement because I thought this will be something that I'll enjoy.
Yep.
So I'm going to come in with, I'm going to go a 7.6. 7.6. Man.
This is a tough one.
This is the thing. I can't even think of how to attach it. So I'm going to stay at 7.6 deer. the worst one ever. But good film. Definitely rewatchable. I definitely suggest watching it for those that haven't seen it. Like Alan mentioned throughout the podcast, you've made it to the end now. But if you if you haven't, definitely go watch it right after you listen to this. So, Alan, thanks for going through this one with me.
That was fun. I thanks for picking this one. I loved it.
I'm glad that we found one that you love, other than Texas Chainsaw. Not that that's a great one, but we'll take it. So this is The Killing of a Sacred Deer. This is the Tame Aperture podcast. You can check us out at tameaperture.com for our portfolio of episodes, previous episodes, and also reach out on social and let us know maybe episodes in the future to review. This is the Tame Aperture podcast signing out.
The Tame Aperture podcast is produced by Dutch Angle Pictures in association with Studio B Productions. Listen, watch, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube.